Celebrations erupt among jihadis across Syria as rebels storm the presidential palace, marking a dramatic shift in power for the first time in more than 50 years. Incredible stuff now. But here's the question. Why now? How did this sneak up on us? Because this is something the U.S. and its allies have been trying to do for at least 10 years now. How'd they get it done in the final weeks of the Biden administration? I'm Ben Swann. This is Truth in Media. What you are seeing here is the aftermath of a 10-day operation as rebels enter the inside of the palace of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who has fled to Russia under reported asylum after rebels overthrew his government over the weekend. As I mentioned, this is something that the U.S. has been trying to do actively alongside with Israel for at least 10 years now, and it ends a 5-decade reign by the Assad family. It also raises bigger questions about U.S. involvement, because these rebels are from a collection of factions like ISIS and AlQaeda in Syria. And let's not forget Washington's long history of arming these groups specifically and expressly for the purpose of overthrowing Syria. In fact, just last week, we showed you these groups using American equipment to enter the country. And in an ironic twist, if you want to call it that, the U.S. is now deciding to launch airstrikes on the very group to prevent them from exposing the chaos, whatever that means, because it's chaos the U.S. has sown and helped to create. At the same time, President Biden pledges that the United States will now help to rebuild Syria. Listen.
The United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity.
Yes. Did you catch it? President Biden just called the situation in Syria an opportunity. But an opportunity for what exactly? Because we saw how well the opportunities in Libya went, and Iraq and Afghanistan, all great opportunities. So here's the next question. Are they trying to hamper the next White House, or did the deep state finally get what it's been trying to do for so long? To overthrow another Middle Eastern country and to hand it over to chaotic terror insurgents. Let's be clear. Washington does not care about the Syrian people. If they did, they wouldn't have destroyed the country over the last decade. They see it as a business venture, a headline grabber, and a piece on their geopolitical chessboard. Well, meanwhile, a new humanitarian disaster may be unfolding as tens of thousands have fled the country, now gathered at the Turkish border. Israeli troops have now crossed the Syrian border in what their government is calling stabilization. Their first such move since 1973. You just can't make this stuff up. The West is expecting a peaceful transition of power in Syria, whatever that means. Let's say that's highly unlikely. Western-backed power grabs rarely end peacefully, as we just listed a few of them for you, like Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan. Instead, expect more U.S. dollars funneled overseas, more bombs to be dropped, more lives lost. Oh, yes, and a new enemy, again, to fight in the Middle East. Joining me now to discuss is Shane Hazel. He is the founder and CEO of Bitcoin Veterans. Shane, glad to have you here, man.
Ben, it's always good to see you, my brother. You've been doing this for a long time, always been a big supporter, and I'm glad you're back at it and just absolutely kicking butt.
Appreciate it, man. All right, let's talk about what's happening in Syria. As you mentioned, I have been at this for a long time, right? Banging the drum about Syria and saying, look what the U.S. is doing here, right? This is just another one of these wars. And in particular, this is one where the Israeli government has wanted to overthrow Assad for a long time. The U.S. has wanted to overthrow Assad. The Russians caused a lot of problems. They got in the way of that happening for some time. Maybe right now, Russia's too busy with what's going on in Ukraine to have paid attention to it. And it finally happened. These groups were able to force Assad out of the country and have taken it, at least for now. How do you see it?
So it's amazing what happens when you just throw a bunch of money at moderate rebels, right? So what we've seen over the past, and you can go through Syria's rebellion history, which is, it's long, it's complicated. You've got groups within groups. And, this all starts back in, I guess about 13 years ago when you had, McCain and Lindsey Graham make their way over to the Northern Storm Brigade and start talking about funding these guys who were at the time, working with basically Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so as this thing progresses, we've spent $17 billion in 13 years in destabilizing this country and making sure that whoever comes into power is going to be let's just call them, basically the useful idiots that this administration, and let's just say the Benjamin Netanyahu administration, are going to use for their next phase of their calculations in terms of moving the greater Israeli project across the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. When you mention about the Biden administration kind of acting as if they're surprised by what's happening, like, oh, we didn't even know, we're kind of shocked by this. Well, first of all, I don't know how you're shocked when, as you mentioned, this has been underway since about 2010, 2011, right? There's no surprise there. The fact is that Obama was a huge supporter of these groups, like the name of the group is al-Nusra, right? Al-Nusra is the al-Qaeda chapter in Syria. But even, this claim that we remember just a few years ago, Jake Sullivan, who was working with Hillary Clinton at the time, had sent her an email saying al-Qaeda in Syria is our friend, right? We're on their side. We're working with them. Everyone knows it. It's like the worst kept secret in the world. And yet here we are watching this all take place. And the Biden administration sits there and says, we didn't even know. We're shocked that this is happening.
Well, I mean, I guess you could look at the Biden administration and think that he's out to lunch most time. But yeah, this has been covered in the media, not well. Let's say not well. I think one of your last guests, the great Scott Horton, was kind of going down this road with you. This is something that when you look at the nuance of what it has happened. There's no surprise here. This is all playing right into the MO of the Five Eyes and Israel's Mossad. I think what we should be doing is looking at what to expect from here. There are already parts of this rebellion that are coming into power. I know there are some that want to seek, peaceful relations with Israel. But at the end of the day, you've also got factions of this rebel alliance, if you will, that's splintering off, saying we're now going to head to Tel Aviv. We want the Gazans liberated. We want this genocide that Israel has been carrying out for over the past year to be resolved through violence, and we're the guys that are going to do it. And this is exactly what I think they intended in the first place. If you can throw in this, group of rebels who has no idea in terms of governance, how to act, then what you do is you create a new enemy force that, the Israelis will be happy to demonize in front of the entire world, and then start, carpet bombing using the D9 tanks that, they use and just basically going for broke. And you mentioned it earlier, they had taken over parts of Golan Heights. Well, they've had Golan Heights for quite a while. And what they've done now is they've moved to the high ground. This isn't, just keeping the peace. This is these guys setting up a strategic military position so that if their will needs to be enforced, that's exactly what they're there to do. And I think this is where this whole thing is headed. They create a boogeyman, and they dispose of the one guy that was, democratically, quote unquote, democratically elected. They continue to lie about him in terms of using, sarin gas and other such NBC type of weapons against his own people. And they dispose him, they run him off. He's lucky he didn't meet the same end that Gaddafi met when he was, disposing of Israel. So, yeah, I think this is just kind of par for the course in Israel's next step in building the broader Middle East. We've seen it with Lebanon. We saw obviously with Palestine. Where I think we're going to see it with Saudi Arabia and parts of Iraq here in the very near future.
It's wild. What do you think, quickly here, will be the response of the Trump administration when they do finally take power? They're getting left with this insane geopolitical chessboard, right, in place, all these moves being made just before they take office. Do you think that Trump will go in there and carpet bomb these groups like he did with ISIS before? How do you think he deals with this?
It's funny. He's kind of tilted his hand a little bit, but you can take a guy at what he says versus what he actually does. And so, he's already said, hey, listen, we should let these guys fight it out. We shouldn't be part of this. But at the same time, you've got guys, like Pete Hegsworth, and you've got Marco Rubio that he's nominated for Secretary of State. These guys are all giant Israeli supporters, and maybe even Israel first over American foreign policy. Trump has signaled to everybody that he wants them to fight it out. But, if his bureaucrats have their way with it, I definitely see us in terms of the U.S. military stepping in and either handing out all sorts of, U.S. aid in terms of dollars, bombs, equipment, whatever Israel needs at the end of the day, where we're not the front, but basically we're supplying the front. And possibly some special operations. And definitely you're going to see people from the State Department, the CIA, NSA, and all of these other groups that are involved.
Absolutely. Shane Hazel, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Ben.
And that is our show. You can catch all of our latest coverage. Check us out on X at @Truth_Media, and you can watch all of our full episodes right now at TruthInMedia.com.